In 2017, I was in Northern Ireland for a college field trip. My religious studies class was visiting stone circles throughout Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland to focus on religious geography. On this particular day, I think we were visiting the Paranormal stone circles. It was a normal, cloudy day, and we were enjoying learning the history of the Bronze Age wonder, excitedly waiting to go back to the hotel and begin a new day of pub hopping. I remember the stone circles being separated from the nearby woods with a small wire fence. For some reason, we were just hanging around the fence, peering at the woods that lay not 20 yards away. We had yet to go into any woods during our trip, staying mainly at the sites surrounded by farmland. I remember wanting very much to go into this old wood for whatever reason. We all seemed to feel curious about it. I decided to climb over the small farm wire fence and see if there's anything interesting in the woods. Now, these woods were different than the woods I was used to in North America. The branches were thick, too thick to stand on. I had to bend at the waist to traverse them. The ground was covered in a soft, light brown moss, broken up by tree roots. I remember quickly moving under the branches, staring at the ground as to not trip. I felt giddy, like I was a child going somewhere my parents told me not to. I felt light and I began to pick up speed. I suddenly looked up to make sure I wasn't about to run into a tree trunk, when something made me stop in my tracks. I saw legs, human legs. I could only see their legs, like someone was standing straight up in the trees. The branches were too thick to stand in, but this person's legs were the only thing visible. I felt an almost animal response of fear that didn't really make sense. I told myself they couldn't see me, because I could not see their face. But for some reason I felt that they knew I was there. Why would someone be out here? We were the only group at the circles and there were no houses nearby. I looked behind me and realised I was much farther in the woods than I'd thought. I could barely see the lights from the place I entered. It was so quiet. They had to have heard me approach. My only thought was, I am closer to them than I am to the entrance. They could get me before I make it out. I was only standing there, bent over for no more than a minute, but it felt like forever. I didn't see them move, but I could tell they were facing toward me, not away. I now really felt like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Only this time, instead of giddy, I felt nauseous. As if it was a deer and they, a hunter, I turned and bolted. I flew through those trees, still bent to avoid collision. I didn't look down this time, stumbling as fast as I could, just focused on the light at the end of the trees. I felt branches pull my hair and clothes as I ran. I couldn't hear anything over my own breathing. As soon as I broke the tree line, I felt a weight lift. The group standing at the fence looked startled by me bursting out of the woods. I told them that I think I saw someone, but it almost felt wrong to talk about it. We left soon after. I don't know what I think it was. Was it a person hanging out deep in the forest? Was it a fae, a spirit, the green man? All I know is that it felt otherworldly. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. I'm 30 years old, female, and a current student in nursing. 2020 Thanksgiving went from exciting to creepy for me. It started off with me passing an exam. I got 86%. Spending a pre-Thanksgiving with my boyfriend and his family. He was leaving for a Cal fire base. This particular night before Thanksgiving, I spent at my brother's house. I left for home around 8 AM. I woke up exhausted, but my mental state turned manic. I was awake and wanting to get my sister a surprise gift for her and her kids. Because she hadn't replied, in my manic state, I decided to go to her house. The day was fun, a lot of food, booze and dancing. I loved it. Around 6 p.m, I planned my trip out to my boyfriend's temporary house. We got into a bit of an argument, as I told him since it was a 3-hour drive, I'd start out around 1 a.m. He did not agree with this, as he thought it would be too late and dark to travel to a rural area, which prompted me to remind him I'm a grown-up. Mistake. He became a bit nerved and upset. However, later we agreed on my arrival. The festivities went on at my sister's. Alcohol fun, Thanksgiving family pictures, and food. Around 11 p.m, I decided to take a nap, however. My manic brain thought to shower. Due to me needing help with the running shower and attempts to fix my hair, I ended up laying down around midnight. I decided to sleep until 1 a.m, but I ended up passing out for over that time frame. I set an alarm to wake up at 1 a.m, but of course I slept through it. I was woken up at 3:30 when my sister asked me, "Why didn't you leave?" I woke up and desperately moved as fast as I could out of the house. I left my phone and had to run around and go back. Once I retrieved the phone, I was on my way for a second time, but I ended up going the wrong way as I mixed up two cities' names because they both started with Ch. Once the GPS was on, I realised I was going the wrong direction. I was on my way. The first hour seemed to be frustrating, as at that time I thought I left my vape pens. Thanks to my sister telling me I'd left my pens, which she meant actual pens. Not her fault, but mine. Although, I found the vape pens 2 days later in my purse. Once leaving the city lines or Sacramento, I got into a race with a Silverado that was lifted, and my jealousy that I was in an SUV versus a beautiful truck, I decided to take on the race, until I reached 120 miles an hour for about 10 minutes, and decided it wasn't worth the ticket. At the time it was only me, the Silverado and a fellow Ford on a road. About 5 minutes later, the Silverado took an exit. Now it was only me, and the fellow Ford in a rural dark area. During the drive, I noticed the Ford was on the side of me, and at one point seemed to be close enough on my right side to swipe me. Due to my blindness in the dark, I was more focused on making it safely. I'm not focused on the car that seemed to even cut off other cars to be on the side of me. This was only a 2-lane road in one direction, so you can understand why it wasn't a bother. We made it into a small town, and that meant taking a major street for about 3 to 5 miles, going through stoplights. At one point I thought, damn, I hate when people are so close to me. It was annoying, but after 2 lights the fellow Ford turned off, and I felt a bit childish for even caring. 2 to 3 lights down, as I made it through the green light, I noticed a car turning onto the street, and being attentive, I noticed the car. It was the same car, and at this point my body started to shake, as the car made sure it was back on the right side of me, keeping up with persistence this time. My head began to hurt, and at first I didn't understand the fear was kicking in. Why would this car come back to the main street? There were only 3 other cars, and he's on the side of me. The fight or flight response began to creep up on me, and I didn't want to turn my head as if I noticed. In that moment, I did not want to call my boyfriend. What if I'm just paranoid? I've travelled alone for longer distances at night before. Is alcohol still in my system? My boyfriend and mom would lose it if I called them. Why is this happening? Don't panic. In that moment, I saw a light turning yellow as we approached side by side. My brain went into rationalization and thought, don't panic, stay calm, ignore the headache. When the lights turn green, stay. See if he goes. We approached the light and stopped. The light seemed to be much longer than the others. I moved my eyes towards the fellow Ford on the side of me. The windows were lightly tinted, but I could see a hat and a person looking towards me. And seconds later, look up at the light and then peer back into my passenger window. My head and heart begin to become one, both in pain and fear. Then the light turned green. There were 2 cars behind us, but I stayed on my brakes. I didn't move. and I didn't see his car enter the intersection either. I turned my head to look, and I could see now more of the silhouette of the man's face under the hat staring at me. I took off slowly to collect my composure and not seem to be scared, and so did he, keeping my pace of slowly going through the intersection. I heard a car behind us beep the horn, and it was like a light switch. I noticed a truck in the distance through the last light that was making it through the abyss of the rural highway that was only a one-lane road. I decided to speed up to make the last light, but so did the Ford, keeping up with my pace. It seemed that he was trying to cut me off, but I went from 45 to 65 miles an hour. The trucks were going slow, and now he was behind me and so close that I couldn't see his lights in full. In panic, I went off the side of the road as to pull off to pass up the truck. So did he. When I noticed he passed the truck and was still just as close behind, I noticed the second truck. I sped up to 90 miles an hour and went towards the left, which was into oncoming traffic, to cut off the truck. My rationalisation was to speed, and even if I was pulled over, I'd be safe, I hoped. I cut the big rig truck off and began to speed up, now able to see far behind me in the distance through my rear view mirrors. I could see the car trying to cut the truck off to the right and left, but cars were oncoming in the opposite lane, and due to trees to the right, the Ford seemed to weave in and out of the lane. He was trying to erratically cut off the truck. By now, even the truck lights were far behind me. I was going about 120 miles an hour and continued it with no effort, as I'm experienced with driving fast, and my adrenaline to flight made it easy. I was still shaking and crying, and the headache became bearable. After about 5 to 10 minutes, I slowed to 80 miles an hour, and then to 65 after about 30 minutes. An hour later, I stopped at a store that appeared to have many customers, which prompted me to stop, as I was paranoid and couldn't be 100% sure the fellow Ford wasn't near me. I went into the store to grab food and coffee, but my appetite was gone, so I decided on coffee and a smoke. Walking into the store, I saw both customers' employees give me a wide-eye look, followed with a look of sorrow, which made me feel embarrassed. I was shaking and my makeup had run all over my face from the crying, and I'm sure I looked I was coming down off of drugs, from the fact that my sympathetic nerve was transferring its hard work over to the parasympathetic nerve. I was coming down off the adrenaline. I went to pay for my coffee and request a smoke, but the shaking made it hard for me to enter my PIN for my debit card. I had to try 3 times. Back to the car I went in fear. My head pounded in my ears. I hoped some tobacco would calm me. The smoke seemed to help calm me down slightly, but the shaking and headache persisted in a bearable manner. The sun was coming up, and I was almost there. I was still shaking and still upset, crying on and off. Of course, when I made it to my boyfriend's, he could sense it and was able to get the truth out of me. I could see he was upset, but he tried to console me, with a hug and kiss and encouraging rest so I could calm down. It was hard to study that day. The headache persisted, and I stayed in bed. My boyfriend made the decision of me not taking any more late night drives, and even made sure I'd stayed in his dwelling until he was off and with me. It's days later, and it's dark out, and I'm scared to go out. I wish I would have listened. 30 or not, no person, male or female, should think it's okay to drive into rural areas at night. There are crazies out there. This is actually 2 stories in one. The main story happened less than 20 minutes ago, at about midnight. I was out doing some late night fishing at a small but deep hole on the side of a state road near my house. Every time I fish here at night by myself, I worry about what would happen, what I would do if someone were to pull over next to me. But it's never happened. Until now. Quick detour for the second story. I wasn't always like this. I used to fish by myself, in the middle of the night, all the time and without a care in the world. But there was one night about 10 years ago, which perhaps merits its own post, but I'll slide it in here and include it in this story anyways. where I was finishing off a seawall next to a bridge, and a car pulls over next to me. Two young men, but older than I was at the time, got out. They walked up to me casually and asked if I was catching anything. I told them no, not really. I wasn't at all suspicious of them. I thought they were going to fish, and just thought they would ask if I was having any luck or not before pulling their gear out. The bridge was a popular fishing spot. I was sitting on the cement seawall with my feet dangling over the edge. One of the men suddenly shoves me off the seawall into the water. They both grab my fishing gear and take it off in their car. The fall was only about 7 feet or so. That's a guess, but it was enough that I couldn't lift myself out of the water and up the cement wall. I had to swim around to where the water was more shallow so that I could climb up the wall. My mom had dropped me off that night, and I was supposed to call her to come pick me up later. My cell phone had gotten wet and wouldn't work. To make matters worse, I was a smoker at the time. Going on 2 years without smoking or any form of nicotine, yay. And my cigarettes had also gotten wet. And as you can imagine, I really needed a cigarette. I did not know what to do except just sit there until eventually my mom drove up randomly. She was furious until I explained what happened. I shudder when I think about how I, or anybody else that they did this to, could have died. These people had no idea whether or not I knew how to swim. Thankfully, I am a very strong swimmer. And apparently they didn't care. If they had not seen on the news the next day that I drowned under the bridge, would they put two and two together? Would they even care? Even if you assume everybody is a strong swimmer, the person could hit their head. There were many rocks under the seawall, and be unconscious. And for what? $50 of cheap fishing gear? Anyways, clearly since this night about 10 years ago, I've been much more cautious when I'm alone at night. But especially when I'm fishing alone at night. So, back to what actually happened tonight, which triggered me to write this post. I had luckily just finished up and loaded my car back up with all of my gear. I was actually sitting in my car and making an Instagram post showing the fish I'd caught, a couple of yellow bullhead catfish and some bluegill. I was trying to quickly write the post and then head home, so I was deep into the world of my phone, not really paying attention to anything else. Something causes me to look up and out of my driver's side of the window, and there's this pickup truck sitting there, and I did not even hear it pull up. It has one of those big steel frame structures around the bed of the truck. I do not know what they are called, but I associate them with hunters or trappers. I have no idea whatsoever if this is an accurate association or not. I do feel like I have seen them, or something similar, holding kennels with hunting dogs, so maybe that's where I got the idea. There's this very stereotypical chubby redneck mullet type of guy looking in my window at me, smiling a creepy smile. He was the passenger. I didn't look past him to the driver. I have no idea how long they were sitting there. I very quickly debated winding my window down and asking what they want, but settled on putting my car into drive, driving around their truck and down the street. I was so freaked out that I did not immediately go home. I went somewhere else and pulled over, looked around to see if they were anywhere to be seen, and then I actually went back to the fishing spot to see if they were still there or not. I did not pull over. I just drove by. They weren't there. It still drives me crazy, wondering what they pulled over for. Did they have something bad planned? Were they just curious? Wanted to help? Will I have to worry about seeing them around town and driving off on them like that? I realise that my reaction is not completely fair. They could have been pulling over to fish. Although you've got to realise how small this fishing hole is. It's a literal fishing hole on the side of the road. It's probably the size of a dining room or something like that. They could have been pulling over to see if I needed help. Who knows? All I know is that I was thinking that if I wind down the window to find out what they want, I could end up with a gun in my face for all I know. And I could not get a chance to drive off. So I drove off without acknowledging them in any way so that I did not miss my chance. Even now I worry about the fact that my car has some slightly identifying marks. Nothing crazy noticeable, but just some small stickers in the window. And if I piss them off by driving off like that, and they live around here? What if my wife meets up with them sometime? What if she has my daughter with her? Am I paranoid? I am still a little freaked out. A couple of years ago, I was couch surfing near Times Square, New York City. One night, my host informed me they'd be out late, so I decided to have a night on the town. I started on foot and eventually, music pulled me into a little spot that felt just right. After dancing for a while, I stepped outside for a cigarette. A man in the smoking area, let's call him AS, asked if I wanted some Alka-Seltzer. Taken aback, I laughed at what I assumed to be a thinly veiled drug reference. He asked what a good girl was doing alone in a place like this, and cautioned me about local dynamics. Some of AS's acquaintances folded into the conversation, and we shared some laughs and doobies. They were handsome and charming, so when AS asked them to keep an eye out for me on the dance floor, I couldn't have been more pleased. They followed me inside while AS remained outside, presumably selling Alka-Seltzer, whatever that means. Those gentlemen showed me an unforgettable time and made me feel safe and respected. Like older brothers who refused to cross the line. Drinks never ran dry, and I've never before or since experienced a dance floor with that much soul. When the music ended, the crowd started making its beats and we danced our way out. Once outside, I checked my phone to see if I'd heard back from the couch surfing host yet. Nada. I sparked a ciggy and began mentally preparing myself to sleep in my camperized car, when AS invited me to join everyone at the after party. It was my night on the town in the Big Apple, so I figured, why not? We took the subway to an infamous borough and found our way to an average-looking building on a sleepy street. Bouncers appeared as we approached the side gate, then stepped to the side to allow AS and his entourage through. AS introduced me to the DJ, bartender, bouncers, and other key players as if I was his significant other. He was trying to be close and physical, but I made it clear that I arrived as part of a group and would be leaving solo. I tried dancing with friends from the club, but they were different now that he was in the room. It suddenly made sense why no one had crossed that gentlemanly line and danced as close as I'd wanted them to earlier. AS had laid claim to me. Before long, I began losing control of my faculties, just as AS was becoming increasingly possessive. I suspect I'd been drugged, and began fearing for my safety. I asked others to distract AS while I slipped out without him, but everyone adamantly declined. Things started fading for me fast, but I remember pleading with the last remaining gentleman from the club earlier to not leave me alone with AS. As his taxi drove away, I will never forget his defeated expression as he eerily made the sign of the cross. AS waited on the sidewalk as the bouncers locked the gates. The danger of the situation seemed to override whatever drugs I'd been given as I kicked it into overdrive and sprinted down the street looking for refuge. He caught up with me after a couple blocks and threw me to the ground, where we rolled around throwing punches. That's my last memory for 3 days. 3 days later, things were very much the same. Me trying to convince bystanders to distract him while I left, them suspiciously declining, me bolting down the street, then him catching me and starting a fist fight. Many bystanders yelled from their windows and threatened to call the cops, but nobody intervened. Eventually, he stopped at a friend's place, assuming he'd broken me. I gathered that his friend was the alpha, managed to build rapport, and brazenly asked to speak with him privately. AS refused to give us privacy, but his friend was truly the alpha and kicked him out of the room. I explained the situation and told him he's welcome to call the cops, but I refused to leave without reasonable assurances AS wouldn't follow. He apologised for my plight and assured me I could leave safely and in a couple of other friends for backup. I walked right past AS out of the door. AS tried to follow me and met violent 3-to-1 resistance as I ran to the nearest subway and hopped the first train, desperately hoping we'd never meet again. Full disclosure, this happened 10 years ago, but I still can't believe how lucky I was to get away. I was 16 and running late for school, as usual. Walking down the road, I noticed there's a dark green car with tinted windows slowly following behind me. This was a residential community, and it was not unusual for people to drive slowly. It was around 9 AM on a weekday, so I naively figured there was no danger as I hurried towards the bus stop. Arriving at the stop, it started to rain, so I decided to stand in the small glass bus shelter to wait for the bus. The creepy green car stopped in front of the bus stop. The driver got out and approached me in the bus shelter. Now, this bus shelter was so small there was only room for 2 people. He stood in the entrance and grabbed each side of the shelter, trapping me inside. He was very large and extremely physically intimidating. Something about his dead eyes sent chills through my entire body. He asked if I was familiar with the area. I said yes, I was. He asked if I was going to school. I responded yes, I was. He then asked if he could drive me to school so I could show him the way. Call it intuition, but something in my head was screaming not to get in that car with him. I politely declined his offer and asked if he needed help with directions or something. Suddenly, he lunged at me, grabbing my arm. He pulled me out of the bus shelter towards his car. I started screaming as he kept insisting it would be faster to drive. By the grace of God, the bus pulled up at this exact moment. All my instincts told me to fight. I clawed at his face, I kicked him, I bit him, I contorted my body until he loosened his grip on my arm. Once free, I leapt on the bus as though my life depended on it. The bus driver asked if I was okay, but I couldn't reply. I ran to the back to find a seat and cried quietly in the corner as the bus carried me into school. All day, I sat in class and said nothing about what happened to me. When I got home from school, I told my parents what happened. They were horrified, especially after I showed them the bruise from the man's hand on my arm. We called the police. The officer arrived late that evening and took my statement. He said there had been several similar incidents in that area. He asked if I could come to the station and look at some pictures to identify the culprit. The following week, my mum and I headed into the police station. The officer sets us up with a computer and we started to scroll through the mugshots. There were so many. Not only was it discouraging to realise how many known sex offenders there are close by, but after a while, all the faces blurred together. Losing hope of identifying the guy, we were about to give up when I recognised his dead eyes in one of the pictures. The officers asked if I was sure. I confirmed it was him, but that he had grown a beard since the photo was taken. They thanked me and said they would call if needed. 2 weeks later, the news announced the police had apprehended the man suspected of kidnapping and assaulting young girls in the area. The news story included his mugshot, and it was the same man I had identified. He was caught with one of his underage victims in his car. It took me years for the gravity of this incident to truly hit me. Had the bus arrived later, had I not been able to twist myself out of his grasp, had he grabbed me while I was walking and didn't see him? So many ways this could have turned out differently. I was so fortunate when other things were not. TLDR, as a young girl, I narrowly escaped being kidnapped and assaulted by fighting off my attacker at a bus stop. To understand my story, you sort of have to know a tiny bit about trespassing laws in our country, in that we don't have any, so long as you're respectful and non-destructive. You can walk over any hills you like, and in my case, camp on any beach of your choosing, so long as once you leave the area is how you found it. I used to love camping when I was little. Our family would go multiple times a year with a large group of my parents' friends and their kids. On average, there were maybe 10 of us at a time, which was a bit of a logistical challenge since we always headed out to this one really remote beach on the coast. Actually, we weren't the only ones. There were always yachts bobbing just off the shore with people in them and other campers lining up and down the beach. Most of them also had children or teenagers, so it wasn't a wild party scene. It was very much an informal family holiday spot. There was even a small building with toilets and showers installed nearby, even though this was the middle of nowhere. I guess the local council must have figured out and got sick of people peeing behind bushes. We took a trip up in spring 2011. I'm really bad with time, but I know this because I got my dog in winter 2010, after picking her out that November from the shelter as a birthday gift from me to me, as I paid her adoption fee. Reddit, I know you love dogs, and she will be very important to the story later on, so let me tell you a little bit about Parmesan. Parmesan came to me as a 6-month-old puppy who had been rescued from a dog fighting situation. We're not entirely sure what breed she is, but my best guess is a Lurcher Staffy mix. She is a wonderfully well-tempered dog with people and most dogs, but you absolutely do not threaten her. She'll have you. So, by the time of this camping trip, I'd had Parmesan a few months. She'd never come camping with us before, but as far as my family are concerned, dogs go on camping trips. So when we all piled into the car, she came too. Unusually though, none of my family friends could make it, so it was only me, my sister, my dad and my mum. I didn't mind. I wasn't sure that attached to the other kids. I'd rather play with my dog, and I'd still have my sister. The drive took the best part of 6 hours, and because we'd left a bit later, although I don't remember why we left later than normal, we arrived at sunset. Not a good time to be building a tent, but we'd expected to arrive to other campers already set up and the beach illuminated in campfires. But the beach was empty. In spite of this, my parents started taking stuff out and trying to build a tent. They asked us to fetch some of the lighter bags from the boot of the car while they sat pointing a flashlight at the sand to see properly. I rolled down the window of the car for Parmesan before getting out. It was pretty hot for that time of year, and I wanted her to have air. Always got to be looking out for my furry little homie. As we're fumbling about in the dark, on a beach in the middle of nowhere, it felt pretty spooky. The one road that led us to this beach was circular and had a bridge over the water, meaning you could basically circle around the beach like a big O shape if you felt like it. I wasn't really paying any attention to the road. I was complaining I was tired, as kids are wont to do, but my mum was. After maybe 15 minutes of my dad trying to nail the tent into the sand, my mum's asking him if had he seen the car drive round. It's been a few times. My dad kind of shrugged her off. He's sort of like that. I don't know if he said anything back to her, but after a few more minutes a car pulled up next to ours on the road, and someone got out. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet from the cars to where we were, and the light was pretty low, except for the torches. We weren't expecting to see anyone else out here at this point, and I think my mum said it must be the security. I don't know why a random beach would have security. I think what she meant was the wildfire trust or something, and they do occasionally come down to do their nosy. The guy was walking pretty unevenly. He must have been drunk or high because he had that stagger to him. There was absolutely no way this guy was sober. Cool, a junkie. Not an unusual find, but it's rare to see them in the wild. As he walked into flashlight range, we realised he was carrying a large knife, maybe 15 inches. Although I was small at the time, so maybe my sense of scale was off. I don't like my dad, but credit to him once he saw this, he got up immediately, holding onto the camping mullet and put us all behind him. The man began to shout wildly at us that we can't camp here, and he was just letting us know. My dad tried to initially be a bit low-key with the guy and told him that that was fine. We'd leave, but his didn't work. He kept coming closer to us, so my dad started shouting, and the man kept shouting back. My sister and I were crying. I remember shaking. I was utterly terrified, as I'm sure anyone would be in that situation. It really did seem like this guy and my dad were going to fight, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't fancy my dad's chances. While it's grim to consider, I'm absolutely convinced he could have killed my dad, and possibly us as well once he was done, as I don't think my mother would have had the common sense to run with us. I love her, but she's always put Dad and her relationship with him above us. This isn't how it went down. A bolt from the black, like a wolf descending on its prey, took us all by surprise. Most of all, the man with the knife. In that moment, Parmesan was the apex predator, large canines representing nature. She got him good by the arm and clamped down hard, ripping his jacket and shredding the skin underneath. He dropped the knife as it had been in the arm she got him by. He kicked her, he punched her and eventually got her off. He grabbed the knife from the sand and ran back to his car and drove off. Parmesan didn't follow him. She stayed with us, muzzle covered in blood. Quickly as we could, we gathered our things and all got back in the car, all pretty shook up by the incident. I looked Palmy over. She was okay, but the car's window was much more open than I'd left it. I think what happened was when the shouting started, she must have put her paws up on the gap I'd left for her. As it was an old car and had the rolly down windows and not an electric button, we think she must have been able to hit it with her paws to force it down enough to squeeze out. This isn't the end of my story. We were all pretty scared, and since we had the dog with us, we couldn't book into the hotel for the night. My parents decided just to drive home so we could all feel safe, but first had to drive into the nearest town for petrol, as they were kind of low. I spent the time trying to clean up Parmesan a little. I'd always loved dogs, but what she'd just done for me blew my mind. As we drove into town, we came across a petrol station, but it looked closed. My dad drove up closer to get a better look and stuck his head out of the window to get a better look at the sign. My mum asked him what on earth he was doing, and he told her he was trying to see when it opens. Never. My heart fucking sank. Parked in the corner, behind a van so we hadn't seen him at first, was the man with the knife. He was sitting on the bonnet of his car, using some tissue paper to clean up his arm. It looked pretty bad. Without stopping to refuel or look anywhere else in town, my dad drove right out of there. He decided to go to the next town over, but this was remote. The next town was 60 miles away. He didn't have that much petrol, we realised as we began driving. We were going to break down. That's fine, Dad said. We had AA cover. They'd come tow us home, or at least to somewhere acceptable for the night. Better than staying in the last town. After driving for maybe 5 minutes, lights flashed from behind us. Another car. The same car the man had been driving. It was him following us. He must have realised we were low on petrol. The next half hour was one of the worst half hours of my life. I had a complete and utter breakdown, as did everyone really. I could tell my parents were trying to keep it under wraps so it wouldn't upset us, but we weren't really kids. We were both double digits, and we know how dangerous the situation was. Dad turned off the radio to conserve petrol, and the man followed us for 55 miles before he peeled away onto another road. Our fuel meter was on the big red E for empty for the last 10 miles. We were driving on fumes. I don't really believe in God, but if he does exist, that was definitely one of his miracles. Once we got there, we drove into a petrol station and refilled to a full tank before driving the rest of the way home. My sister and I slept in the car after that. I only woke up once we made it all the way home, just grateful nothing worse had happened after that. After getting some sleep, my mum phoned the non-emergency line for the police and reported what had happened. They never got back to her after that, but apparently the woman she spoke to said they may wish to in the future, as he matched the description given as a suspect wanted in relation to a murder charge. No idea if he actually was the guy or just a random psycho, as I said. They never got back to her. So what's the takeaway then? Other than crazy men on the beach, let's not meet. Well, for me it's that I love Parmesan. She's still with us now, old as the hills and twice as grizzled as one of my mum's friends likes to joke. I don't know why she did what she did that day. I couldn't tell you what her thought process was. What I do know is that this poor puppy was born into an environment where they abused and neglected her, only to be rescued and taken to a shelter where her mother and siblings all found homes before her. Despite how badly people had treated her, when I took her home she forgave but never forgot. I think the saying is, I never trust a person who doesn't like a dog, but I'm always trust a dog when they don't like a person. They have a very good understanding of human body language, and I think she must have understood how much danger we were in. If you're able to, please adopt. You might find yourself in a situation like mine one day. I promise you, if you're willing to save a four-legged friend's life, they will pay you back tenfold if they're able to, without a thought for their own safety. I paid £78 for Parmesan's adoption fee, which is a lot when you're a kid, but it chills me to my bones knowing that if I hadn't been so insistent on a dog, I might be dead.